The film begins in a peaceful village where the young Thorfinn lives. He runs through the village, shouting in search of his beloved Inga. He reaches a barn and she surprises him by jumping on his back. The two kiss passionately on the ground, and Inga asks if they should not be looking after Thorfinn's brother Oscar. But the love-struck young man ignores her, saying that he can fend for himself. Meanwhile, little Oscar walks near the forest collecting fruit when he spots a strange man with prominent canine teeth playing a flute that draws his attention. Oscar approaches the man, who stops the music and begins a conversation with malicious tones with the boy. He introduces himself as Wolfstan and says he is lost and shows a map of the lands of that region. Oscar looks back and notices two furry creatures approaching in the distance on the hill. The frightened boy says it is dangerous to be near the forest and says they should not be there. But Wolfstan soon says he is not alone and that he always hunts with his pack. Then Oscar turns again and notices that now the hill is taken by dozens of creatures that look like werewolves. He then drops the basket he was carrying to the ground, and a desperate scream echoes throughout the village. Thorfinn is startled by the scream, but because they are engaged in an intimate moment, he and his girlfriend end up ignoring the sound. Suddenly, large werewolves begin to appear in the dark streets of the village and start attacking the entire village. Chaos ensues as the beasts attack the villagers. Wolfstan appears with eyes black as night and a huge mouth full of blood. In the barn, the couple Thorfinn and Inga continue together in intimate moments until they are interrupted by a young man who suddenly opens the door, frightening them. The young man then falls dead with a knife in his hand. Terrified by the scene, Thorfinn runs to hide in one of the barn stalls, while Inga approaches the young man and takes the knife from his hand, saying that her family is out there, implying that she must protect them. One of the werewolves then appears at the door and walks slowly toward Inga, who, with no way out, points the knife at the creature. Thorfinn, terrified, only hides in silence and watches as the monster kills his girlfriend in front of him and drags her body away. After some time, he grabs the knife and goes outside in search of his brother Oscar. Upon arriving home, he sees his father bloodied sitting on the floor. He asks about Oscar's whereabouts, but Thorfinn cannot say where he is. Then they hear one of the werewolves approaching, and Thorfinn's father tells him to run immediately. But it is already late, and soon the beast appears at the door. Thorfinn hides under the table while watching his father be attacked by the werewolf. The young man runs out of the house, but an elderly man fleeing collides with him, throwing him to the ground and leaving him unconscious. Upon waking the next day, the trail of destruction and death left by the beasts is brutal. The village leader then speaks about the existence of 3 great legendary knights, and that they are the only chance to defeat those beasts. Some days pass, and the knights arrive at the village and meet with the local leader, Baron Magnus. Hamelin Wiltshire, leader of the group, introduces the other colleagues: Thomas, Osmond, and Hal Skullbreaker, a bandit who was recruited to help them, something that does not please the Baron much. Magnus then explains that his people were massacred by enormous wild beasts. The knights joke and ask about the size of these creatures, and the Count then signals to his aide, who takes a severed hand of one of the werewolves and places it on his table. Suddenly, the hand moves, frightening everyone and putting them on alert about the beasts. Magnus explains that the knight's mission is to cross the beast's territory and report to King Vortigern about the beast situation, requesting support to resolve this problem. Hal says that the king is a cruel man who does not help his people, but the Count quickly replies that despite being cruel, the king would not reject an opportunity for battle. The Count then hands over a map and says they need a safe route to reach the castle because the forest is very dangerous. Young Thorfinn hears the whole conversation and offers to guide the group through the forest to show the way, which he had traveled with his father previously. After much resistance from everyone, Hamelin agrees with the young man's idea to guide them to avoid getting lost on the way, but that he should accept the risk he would run on this undertaking. Thorfinn accepts immediately, since he has nothing left to lose. Hal questions Hamelin about the decision to take Thorfinn on the mission, and Hamelin then repeats that they do not know the forest, and emphasizes that that situation is very different from facing other men because these are wild beasts, therefore any help should be welcomed. Hal only has to agree with his leader. Thorfinn is in his house preparing to leave with the knights when he receives a visit from Count Magnus, who is met with confirmation of the young man's decision. The Baron then gives as a gift the axe that once belonged to Thorfinn's father and tells him not to trust Hal because he is not a true knight. Thorfinn leaves the cabin and joins the knights waiting for him outside the village limits. Percy, the group's squire, jeers at Thorfinn's arrival, but is soon put in his place by Hamelin. Hal tries to intimidate the young man once again, saying that he would not risk his life for him, but Thorfinn, determined to follow the mission, says he will protect himself, which makes Hal quite uncomfortable. Upon reaching a crossroads, Hal and Thorfinn argue about which route to take from that location. Hamelin decides to hear Thorfinn's experience and follows the path suggested by him, leaving Hal increasingly irritated with the young man. They enter the dense forest with the intention of reaching the village of Chalamet to take shelter. After a long walk, they find a hanged body already in a state of decomposition that brings back memories of the night of the massacre, when his girlfriend Inga was killed by one of the werewolves, which makes him vomit. That scene makes the group want to get away from there as soon as possible. They camp in a clearing further ahead, already under the darkness of night, and tell stories around the fire. Percy makes a joke with Thorfinn, making him eat fish intestines, making everyone burst into laughter. Thomas says that in his land stories about werewolf men were told a long time ago. Legends said that men who committed serious crimes would be turned into wolves by the gods. Some would have to serve their punishment for 7 years to get rid of the curse. The group reflects and agrees that this would be one of the worst punishments for a man, as it would be better to die as a human than as a beast. Someone watches the group stealthily through the undergrowth. Next, the group prepares to sleep while Hal remains on guard near the fire. Thorfinn asks Thomas why Hal seems not to like him very much. Thomas then explains that it has nothing to do with him, but rather with Hal's past, who, in Thomas's words, is the most victorious among those knights, but who suffers from a terrible loss and a great hatred that manifests in battle, to the point that his friends are grateful to be on his side and not against him. Later, Thorfinn falls asleep and ends up dreaming of scenes from the massacre in his village, making him wake up startled with his knife ready to attack. He then gets up and sits by the fire next to Hal. Hal, who likely noticed the nightmare, comments to him about the nights being hard and the bad memories even worse, and consoles him, saying that at least in a dream it is possible to find them, the loved ones who were lost. Moreover, he adds that in his opinion, the knights need more than courage and bravery. They need pure fury. Hal tells Thorfinn that although at that moment it seems pointless to live because of the losses, soon everything will change, because for him there is no greater gift than life, and that is why they fight. From the depths of the forest, the sound of a flute is heard by the pair. Hal soon offers to go check the source of that sound, telling Thorfinn to take up his axe and stay alert. Hal finds Wulfstan sitting on a small ruined wall playing his flute. Hal soon identifies that he is not human, and Wulfstan begins his monologue about being an evolved being, for having freed himself from the burden of being human. Hal threatens Wulfstan, but he responds by saying that everything was part of his plan to separate him from the others, leaving them vulnerable to the attack of his pack. He then plays on his flute, a deafening sound that resembles a wolf's howl that stupefies Hal and warns the creatures that it is time to start the attack on the camp. They are surrounded by numerous werewolves as they try to defend themselves. Thorfinn fights for his life, swinging his axe to fend off the attacks of one of the creatures, which manages to disarm the young man and knock him to the ground. Each of the knights fights one of the werewolves, and Hamelin shouts for Percy to run and hide. Thorfinn fights for his life while trying desperately to reach his axe, but ends up being saved by Hal, who arrives next, pushing the werewolf away and helping the young man to stand. Osmund is knocked down and brutally killed by one of the werewolves. In another part of the forest, Wulfstan performs a transformation like a shedding of the skin, revealing his full animal form. Thomas lands a hammer blow to the head of the creature that attacked Osmund and kneels to check his friend's vital signs, only to confirm his death. Stealthily, 2 werewolves approach and capture the man, while another of the creatures grabs Hamelin, cornering him against a tree. In another part of the forest, Thorfinn climbs a tree to hide from one of the approaching werewolves. The young man ends up dropping his axe from up there. The creature passes by without noticing his presence, but Thorfinn ends up slipping and falling from the tree, being immediately attacked by the beast. However, the young man quickly reaches his axe and manages to land a decisive blow on the werewolf, causing it to flee, allowing Thorfinn to escape as well. He reunites with Hamelin and Hal at the fire, watching Osmund's body. In a remote cave, Thomas is repeatedly struck by Wulfstan with a piece of wood, while Percy watches everything terrified. Wulfstan suggests to Percy that he join him so that he does not die, promising to transform him into something stronger. Afraid of dying, Percy accepts the proposal, and then Wulfstan begins to bite the young man several times, tearing off pieces of his skin and smearing himself with his blood, while Thomas gradually loses consciousness. By morning, Hal polishes Osmund's armor at the river, still frustrated by the loss of his battle companion. Hamelin assesses Thorfinn's wounds and sees that there is nothing serious. Thorfinn asks about Thomas and Percy's whereabouts, but Hal says that by then they would already be dead. Hamelin agrees, saying they can no longer do anything for their colleagues. Irritated and frustrated, Hal says that had he stayed with the others, instead of going after Thorfinn, things would be different and his comrades would be alive. Hamelin reproaches him, saying they cannot blame the young man, as no one could have known the strength of the beasts, and asks Thorfinn to go clean the blood from his body in the river to avoid being detected. Arriving at the foot of the waterfall that originates the small river, something in the trees catches Thorfinn's attention. He spots in the distance a red-haired figure who flees when perceived by him. Thorfinn follows the creature but cannot catch up, stopping by the edge of another part of the stream. He then spots on the bank Thomas's hammer and sees the entrance of the cave from which the man's screams can be heard. The young man then picks up Thomas's hammer and cautiously enters the cave. Inside, Thorfinn sees Thomas tied and hooded on the ground, surrounded by creatures that sleep like guard dogs. He approaches Thomas slowly, untying his hands and telling him to run when the creatures follow him. Thorfinn then takes up Thomas's hammer and strikes a powerful blow at one of the werewolves that slept nearby, awakening all the others, including Wulfstan and Percy, who slept together deeper in the cave. Wulfstan shouts that he wants Thorfinn's blood, ordering the creatures to pursue him. Thorfinn runs away, distracting everyone and allowing Thomas to flee. Wulfstan corners Thorfinn and tries to persuade him to transform and join them, but Thorfinn immediately refuses and flees, finding Thomas at the exit and helping him reach the place where Hal and Hamelin were preparing Osmund's grave. Hal asks Thomas about Percy's whereabouts, but he reports that the young man has become a beast now. He also says that Thorfinn managed to take out one of the beasts and that he drove them away from that place. Hal says that Thomas must stay behind due to being weak and wounded, which would make them vulnerable. Thorfinn is against the idea, and Hamelin agrees, saying that would be an act of savages like the creatures they fought. Hal then reluctantly agrees, telling the young man to wear the armor that belonged to Osmund and giving him his sword as well. He then notices that Thorfinn's axe has a blade made of silver, which is strong against the werewolves. The group then heads to the village of Chalamet seeking shelter. They arrive and find the couple Maggie and Griff. Hal introduces them, saying they are knights and that they seek help for Thomas, who is quite wounded. Maggie, who is a healer, offers help to the group. Hal observes that there are several silver items around the place and says they need to melt the items to plate the weapons of everyone, increasing their chances of survival. After some resistance from Griff, Hal manages to convince him to follow his plan, and they then head to the village. Maggie says that Thomas just needs food to improve. She prepares a kind of soup for them, but Thomas seems skeptical, saying he has no interest in her magic. Hal and Thorfinn follow Griff to the forge, where he begins to melt the silver items while talking about what happened in the village. He says travelers arrived and asked for shelter, but during the night they became beasts and began to attack everyone. He says he had to hide women and children from the beasts, but that everyone fled the place afterward. Thorfinn asks why only they survived, and Griff replies that it was luck, and says there is still silver hanging in the forest to produce a few more blades. Back at Maggie's cabin, she offers soup to the men. Hamelin makes no ceremony and attacks the dish while Thomas, wary, avoids eating. Hamelin soon begins to feel sick. Then Maggie reveals that she and her husband started offering people as food to the beasts as a form of protection. Meanwhile, Thorfinn finds a trap door outside where two boys agonize trapped. Maggie reveals the desperate plan to poison the boys so that the beasts devour them and also die poisoned. Suddenly, Hamlin is hit by 2 wooden darts in the neck, causing Maggie to scream in terror. Thomas tries to help his friend, but is also struck, and we see that it is Wulfstan who fired the shots outside. Hal is attacked by Griff in the forge, who stabs him in the rib with a dagger. Hal fights him and presses his face against the crucible with molten silver, burning Griff's face. Outside, Hamlin and Thomas try to flee but fall dead to the ground as Thorfinn approaches. The young man sees Wulfstan approaching and begins to run. Back at the forge, Hal lands several blows on Griff and then tries to reach his sword to eliminate the threat, but he has difficulty due to his injuries. Griff then stabs Hal in the thigh with the dagger, making him scream in pain. With great effort, he reaches his sword and with a single blow, Hal and Thorfinn meet outside and begin to flee upon seeing some werewolves approaching. They run through the trees while pursued by the beasts. At one point, Hal manages, with a quick spin and a precise blow, to kill one of the beasts, but is attacked by the other monster shortly after, which knocks him down and begins to maul him. He is saved by Thorfinn, who lands an axe blow on the creature, killing it immediately. They run a few more meters, and Hal begins to feel the pain caused by the earlier blow. He says he is fine, but suddenly is hit by 2 wooden darts fired by Wulfstan. He then tells Thorfinn that he is their only hope, and that he should run and tell everything to the king while he would stay there to try to delay the enemies. Thorfinn flees the place, while Hal tries to face the beasts, but soon falls to his knees weak. Wulfstan approaches, and says that Vortigern would like to see his face in that situation, then points the crossbow at Hal's head, who without strength only accepts his fate. Thorfinn finds himself facing a steep and rugged cliff full of rocks, and begins to climb the place that is part of his path to find the king. He begins the climb with great difficulty, advancing with much suffering due to his wounds, but at a certain point he drops his sword. In trying to retrieve it, he falls and loses consciousness for a moment. He wakes up and recovers the sword, managing to reach the top of the hill where the great Bragan Castle stands, home of the king. However, upon entering the place, Thorfinn finds only ruins and realizes he is surrounded by dozens of beasts that have crept in from all sides. Suddenly, Wulfstan appears and in a sarcastic tone says that the king is waiting for him. Thorfinn proceeds cautiously along the path indicated by Thorfinn, still surrounded by the werewolves. Reaching the top of the tower, Thorfinn finds King Vortigern. The king reveals to Thorfinn that Hal said he would come, and reveals that his warlord, Wulfstan, brought him so that he himself would eliminate him. Vortigern reveals that the werewolves are his army, which arose to solve the kingdom's problems due to the people's despair and weakness. On his knees, and with his last thread of hope, Thorfinn speaks of the terrors he witnessed, from the massacre of his village to the death of his friends, and begs the king to end that evil. Vortigern says the young man is brave but foolish, and Thorfinn replies, saying it is better to die human than to live like an animal. Thorfinn is taken to a hall where Hal is imprisoned. Vortigern calls Hal Harry and reveals that he is his son, and that the two are very alike in their thirst for carnage, and reveals that at some point he killed his own brother in battle. The king lashes Hal with a whip, who says he does not need to trade away his humanity to be great, which is the reason for his contempt for his father. Vortigern then says that before Hal dies, he wants him to witness Thorfinn declaring loyalty to him. He strikes Hal with more lashes and forces the young man to declare support for him. Thorfinn agrees, and then with a smile on his face, the king thrusts the sword through Hal's throat, driving Thorfinn into despair. The king withdraws, and then Wulfstan attacks Thorfinn to transform him into a beast. Despite the transformation occurring, Thorfinn's hatred makes him keep total control over his mind, leaving him with the beast's strength and the human mind. He then approaches Hal and pulls the sword from his throat and strikes Wulfstan, who is terrified by what is happening. The king returns to his tower, but soon hears a desperate scream coming from below. He then sees Wulfstan fleeing in despair, holding his wounded hand, and immediately after Thorfinn appears and kills him by stabbing the sword into his back. The king then flees, while several werewolves approach to attack Thorfinn, now already with elongated teeth, indicating a more advanced stage of the transformation. He defeats all the beasts with mastery and confidence never seen before, while gradually searching for the king's whereabouts. He then finds him in an open area wielding a sword waiting for him. Thorfinn prepares his sword to strike Vortigern, but is surprised and captured by two werewolves that drag him to the ruins of the place. The king approaches with his sword in hand to strike the final blow to Thorfinn, but with an agile and swift leap, the young man overthrows the king and kills him right there. After eliminating the last of the werewolves, Thorfinn leaves the castle and returns to his village, carrying his sword and the decapitated head of one of the monsters. The villagers kneel before him, and Baron Magnus receives him. Later, Thorfinn explains the situation to everyone, saying that all the werewolves are dead, as well as the king. Handing his sword to Magnus, he says he is the last of the living wolves. Magnus then performs the ritual, bestowing upon him the title of Sir Thorfinn and asking that the gods bless him, finally beheading the young man with a precise strike. The film ends with the vision of Thorfinn's severed head on the ground while the villagers cheer his name.